provided they have the space to be an F&B, premises allow F&B outlets, and can get approval from SFA, land use permissions, and so on. So, and conditions were imposed. The pivoted businesses would need a food preparation area to prepare and serve food, adequate indoor dining area for customers to be seated to have their meals, with safe distancing in place. And once converted to F&B, they were subject to the same safe management measures, SMMs, imposed on F&B outlets, meaning no intermingling amongst patrons and staff, no live music, no performances, various other conditions. So in summary, since from March 2020 until now, 1, KTVs were not allowed to operate, and 2, some KTVs were allowed to become F&B outlets, as well as some pubs and bars, which they were also allowed to pivot to F&B outlets. Once we suspended the unilateral opening with Vietnam in February of 2021, there were many applications under the boyfriend-girlfriend category. We looked at it, scratched our heads. The applications raised concerns because, I just give examples, several examples. There will be one Vietnamese applicant and multiple sponsors claiming to be the lady's boyfriend. There will be Singaporean sponsors, many who applied for multiple girlfriends. It's possible, but, sponsors who are already married to someone else applying, many men claiming to be a single lady's boyfriend, I mentioned it earlier, and sponsors who are unable to substantiate when we ask questions. What relationship do you really have with this person who is proposed to become sponsored? But as members of parliament will know, the residents will come to the MPs and say, I'm a Singapore citizen, I've done national service, why are you not allowing my girlfriend to come in? We all have received such appeals, ICA received. But when we looked at these applications for girlfriends, and they were all primarily girlfriends to come in, we decided this won't do. We have to stop this. So in March of 2021, this girlfriend-boyfriend category was removed.
The question specifically on the KTV issues, indeed, as Minister Ong mentioned earlier, lots of disappointment among Singaporeans, but I thought it would be important to have at least some understanding of common facts before coming to conclusions. So the first question is with regard to the enforcement regime at the pivoted establishments. Was it a heightened sort of enforcement regime? Minister mentioned a few numbers, 202 enforcements from October last year to July this year. But was there some specific attention paid on pivoted KTV establishments? I think earlier on, Minister Wong spoke in a Facebook post about a cat and mouse game. A minister referred to that as well. Was there were additional conditions imposed on certain operators in view of their past record or reputation, so to speak? And in this regard, again, was there a differentiated regime from the enforcement agencies to pay more attention to some of these establishments? Minister spoke of I think a total of 7 establishments, and I stand corrected if I'm wrong, 7 establishments that have seen their licenses revoked, but that about 10% of the establishment, of the pivoted KTV establishments have been in breach of regulations. So are those, or are the licenses for those, for that 10%, which I think would extend to about 40 establishments, are going to be revoked as well? And finally, I received some emails from members of the public about warnings that they had given the authorities about some of these KTV establishments. How many warnings or feedback how many pieces of feedback did not just MHA but also MOH and the other agencies receive on potential SMM violations, egregious SMM violations in KTV establishments? Thank you.
First, on the enforcement regime, I think Mr. Singh wanted to know if it's heightened. I think Mr. can assume that if there was one enforcement action per day, it's quite intense, and it's been so from October of last year. to July of this year, right from the beginning. And this is quite apart from what safe distance ambassadors and so on do. Second, I think Mr. Singh wanted to know, was there a particular focus on pivoted outlets? I gave the breakdown just now. Not all were targeted pivoted outlets. In fact, there were a number who were not to be operating at all. And in fact, totally illegal operations. And I would say, in terms of seriousness, those are particularly pernicious in terms of transmission, the kind of activities and so on. I mean, nothing is supposed to be happening in a warehouse. They set up and they do everything. And so those kinds of operations were busted as well. So a broad range, and also F&B operations which are not pivoted operations, just simply reopening. There are also some of them have been breaching. Now, don't mistake me to think that every single one was therefore engaging in what we might consider to be shadier activities. Sometimes there were breaches also, but we needed to target a broad range. Third, I think Mr. Singh wanted to know 7 have been closed, but 10%, I pointed out that 10% were in breach, about 40 odd out of the 400 odd which had pivoted. And are they going to be closed? I assume Mr. Singh is not asking for closing down every operation as long as there's any breach. There is a framework. Depending on the nature of the breach, there will be a penalty, and the penalty is transparent, and penalty will be imposed according to the kind of breach that has been committed. And I think most people will know there is also a point system for breaches, which leads to closure. Of course, egregious breaches, there will be closure. But, and I wouldn't ascribe to Mr. Singh the suggestion that police now should get even tougher and just close everyone down as long as there is one breach. Right? Now, the last point, I think, was whether warnings given by public were taken seriously. Now, I don't do the operations, obviously, but I think most MPs will know how, in general, police intel system is expected to work. Police have their own intelligence framework, their own ground framework, and public tip-offs. A lot of crimes are solved by public tip-offs, and they are important. They're taken seriously, and I assume that goes into the assessment framework on what operations to conduct. Thank you, sir.